Hey y'all, you know it always takes it a second to kick in, which is joy. Hey Jessica, how are you? I'm so interested in seeing what everyone thought about this one. I'm so I'm so excited to see what everyone thought about. This is a very interesting read. Okay, well, I'm not going to hold us because I do have to work in the morning and I do not want to be up all evening, my friends. Hey Shay. Um, so we're going to go ahead and jump in. What did everybody rate volumes 1 and 2 of the crossover? Hello, Tia. Hey, Ulysses, Jennifer, Jada, Allison. Nice to have you all here. It's nice to be doing these again. Hey, Steffi. Okay, so Allison said both volumes received a 3. Okay, both were 4 stars for Jessica. I don't want to, I'm going to wait till y'all say your ratings before I say mine. Okay, Jennifer gave both 4. Okay, Steffi, 3 for both. Anybody else have ratings? I don't want to give my ratings before everyone has the chance. Okay, I haven't got my rating yet. I wanted to wait for the discussion. I know that in the past, some of our discussions have changed ratings. So this one shall be interesting. Okay. So I okay, Alyssa says same. I have very complicated feelings about this series. I think for volume 1, I'm going to go for like a 3.5. But volume 2, I'm torn between a 4 and a 4.5. Um, it's I didn't read these earthen back moves. Okay. Um, the crossover was more meta than what I anticipated. Not gonna lie to y'all. This is a very, very meta series. I think that the reason why I went higher with volume 4 is because, I mean, volume 2 is because everything came full circle. And I finally understood what Kate's was attempting to do with all of it. Because at first, I was like, because keep in mind, when we first chose this title, I think I had read maybe the first like 2 issues of it. And so I knew what the concept was, but I wasn't far enough into it for it to really have much of an impact. I thought the idea of like the human world and the comic world um, clashing together was very interesting. I think that one of the disadvantages of this, and this was is one of my personal quirks with the series, is that it relies so heavily on previous comic book artist, writer, and character knowledge. If you are not into the world of comics, I think it does take away from the reading experience. especially if you're not familiar with a lot of the cameos, which some of my favorite characters in the comic book industry made cameos. Um, and there were some funny nods to like Marvel and DC, even though they can't outright. So one of the things that I think that he did a good job of doing is he pulls in a lot of these characters that are writer owned. Um, so like what's interesting is that when you write for Marvel or DC, you don't own any of those characters. So when they did pieces and parts of the comic, there were nods to Marvel and DC without outright saying that it was Marvel or DC character wise. They do mention Marvel and DC. Um, but it was just fascinating. Like, I don't know if y'all have ever read The Wicked and the Divine. There were characters there from The Wicked and the Divine. Lucifer was in one shot, and I was like, oh my God, that's Lucy from The Wicked and the Divine. Um, there was cameos from Chew, which threw me off for a second. So I love that it was a nod to um, indie author author or writer owned characters, which is nice. Um, it is, unless you're deep into Cates's work, I thought it was kind of impossible to know. Um, it's kind of impossible to know. And see, not knowing Kate also kind of it plays a role into it as well. Like Kate's he's a powerhouse. Um, he's a powerhouse in the industry, and he takes a lot of jabs at himself. But I think that first volume for me relies so heavily, and even some aspects of like the second volume. So there's a scene, I don't know if y'all remember this explicit scene where Scott Snyder is found dead, and then when the detective duo, when they pick up the bat, it's because Scott Snyder wrote Batman. And so they can't outright say, like, that it's Batman. But if you're familiar with Scott Snyder and Snyder's run of Batman, then him picking up that bat thing was pretty significant. So I think that you can enjoy it, but I think one of the interesting things about it is that if you have the more knowledge you have, the more you get out of it. The more you understand, like even the Chip Zdarsky insert where he's referencing like sex criminals. So it's so many pieces and parts, and it's not unfortunate, but I think that it it takes away from how deep this comic really is. It takes away from that. Like, I think you can enjoy it, but to really get what Cates was doing with it, it helps to have some of that background knowledge and to be familiar with some of the writers and artists um, that that are a part of this whole entire thing. Like the fact that like Kirkman was referenced in all of this, like that, those are big things. The fact, like I said, that he got Chip Zdarsky in on this. It's very chaotic and super, super, like I said, this is the most meta comic that I've ever read in my entire life. I'm sorry, y'all. Um, Let me catch up. Yeah. I think you can still I definitely think that you can I think that it's you definitely can enjoy this. Don't get me wrong. I definitely think that you can um I think you can definitely enjoy this without having that background knowledge, but I think that having the background knowledge does add another layer of depth to it. Like it really does. Like for me, like the excitement of seeing different things based off of like the relationship that I know some of these writers and artists have, or having knowledge of certain characters, it kind of ties into what he was saying at the end where he was like, the story belongs to y'all. When we're done writing and illustrating it, the story is yours at that point. You direct the story. And it just shows how much of an impact I think that comics have on people and the community as a whole. So like that excitement that you feel from like The Walking Dead, or like the excitement that I felt when I was like, freaking Scott Snyder, and then he pulls the Batman symbol out, and I'm like, smart and wise, like Alyssa said, like it's a show of resistance. Like you're putting them in without crossing that boundary with Marvel or DC, to say that you're taking their intellectual property, which is always such a huge thing with Marvel and DC writing for them, is that at the end of the day, none of those characters really you know um belong to you. So I think that it it provides that the layers that he's giving you towards the end, but it relies so much sometimes, I think, on that previous knowledge, and I think that's where it gets a little shaky for me. That was for me. I think that like you could enjoy it, but then I'm like, dang, you would enjoy it even more if you knew exactly what he was making references to. Um, I thought that volume two was stronger because that's where Cates was able to pull it together and it got even more meta. So, one of the interesting things, and it's kind of sad, and I don't know if this was intentional or not. So, I don't know if y'all know that Cates went through a divorce. So, Megan actually was his wife. Um, and Cates got into, I don't know if it was like a car accident, um, or an accident in general. I can't remember, and I don't want to give you misinformation, but I think it was a car accident, where he lost his memory and he couldn't remember anything from 6 months prior. And this was last year. And so he kind of he pulled out a lot of stuff. Yeah. Um, and he was going through like he had to go through a divorce at that time too. And so part of me was like, I was wondering um if this owed to Megan, like losing his wife. I wonder if like their relationship was falling apart um prior to this accident, and if that was kind of like his way of pouring out his emotions, like because he kept saying like, oh, I wanted this to be a love story, I wanted this to be a love story, I wanted this to be a love story. And I wonder if their relationship was already falling apart at that time, and that was just kind of like him working through the loss of that relationship. Yeah, they were going through a divorce at the same time that he was recovering from that accident. And so it's unfortunate, and that's why I was like, dang. So then I started looking at like the pub date for the second volume, which came out in what, like 2022. So this would have been right before the divorce. um so yeah, I mean, I don't know, I just thought that second volume for me was stronger, and maybe it was stronger for me because it got even more meta. It's like, as soon as they start talking about like who created you, like Ellie, who made you? I was like, man, there's no way. I was convinced. I was like, Cates is not going to insert himself into this shit. I knew that he was the narrator, and I kind of figured that he was the guy with like the he was the guy with the superpowers that is writing the story. But I was like, Cage is not going to insert himself into this. And so when we get those panels where it's literally Kate's, I was like, yo. I said, you know what? I said, this man is unhinged. And I think that's what made it even more enjoyable for me as a read, was because it just got more unhinged. And the fact that he got other creators to be like, he got their permission for them to just be completely, like, completely unhinged as well. It just, I don't know. It just added to the appeal of it. Um, I really, really enjoy that aspect of it because they're poking fun at themselves while also, I think, at the same time making a very strong statement about comics. And in a time where I think now people are gravitating more towards understanding and appreciating um, comics, I think that because with the pub date on this of course is years before now, but I think that people often underestimate the power of comics and graphic novels, especially those that don't necessarily read them as frequently as maybe some of us in the chat now. Um, But I think there's a certain power that comes with comics and graphic novels and what writers and artists are capable of doing. And that there's an appreciation to have there. How invested we become in these characters and their lives and their staying power. When you think of characters like Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, these characters came out in like the 30s, the 40s, and still here we're talking, in 2024, these characters still hold relevance today, which I thought was that interesting question of which you had, like, um, we can't take anything with us. Everything around, which is the part that really got me, like, us as humans, you can't take anything with you. Everything you touch is temporary, is on loan, which is true. Everything that we have on this planet technically is on loan because it's not like we can take anything with us. And we are inevitably, I think, so easily forgotten. When you think of these superheroes, these comics, the power, the staying power that they have is in a lot of ways just, it's phenomenal. I don't know. I thought that was pretty cool. This was also my favorite part, Jennifer. I love the fact that, because we always talk about this, that it's not, the art is so important. The art in a comic is everything. And so it's not necessarily just about the words. A lot of times writers have to pace themselves around the artwork. And the artwork is driving the narrative. And I love that he twisted and it's like, oh yeah, we think it's the writers controlling the story, but really it's the artwork that drives it. That's what this is. Yes, we're here for the storytelling, but goodness gracious, if you have storytelling and not good art, like, what is the purpose? It was just, yeah, I didn't know how he was gonna end it when he kept saying like, "Oh, um, I can't believe I didn't figure it out until now. I can't believe I didn't figure it out until now." And then he's like, "It's the artist." I was like, "Dang, that's actually a really, really good way to end this, and I really, really appreciate it." Um, yeah, volume 2 for me was just much better, in terms of, like, development and the chaos of it all. It read better to me. I didn't think I was gonna like volume 2, but I did. Yes, the Chip Zdarsky scheme was iconic because it felt very Chip Zdarsky. Like, and they kept, like, when they kept, like, talking about all the people that died and, like, Brian K. Vaughan, I was like, "Oh my gosh, what in the hell is this?" Kirkman's dead, but you know what? It's almost like I was pleasantly, because y'all know I read all those volumes of The Walking Dead last year, at the beginning of last year. And Kirkman really, like, he really took my soul on a very, very difficult journey at the beginning of last year. And so part of me was very pleased, and I feel like that was very intentional for those that have read The Walking Dead. It was almost cathartic to see him get killed like that because I know it sounds so awful, but I think that that goes back to this whole how everything um belongs to us as like as readers of comics, as like the community. It felt cathartic for me because I feel like Kurtman did some damage to me in reading The Walking Dead and seeing the way people get brutally murdered in that series. It almost was just like it was a full circle moment for me. I'm not going to even lie to you. It was a very full circle moment for me to see that man get butchered the way he did in that panel. And at first I thought he was gonna stop because he was like, "Ooh, we never had two eyeballs like pop out." And then he just kept going. And Kirkman was like nothing but a pulp. I was like, goodness gracious, that's like, listen, yes, killed by your own character. Got to be. Exactly. 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 That's a good point, Jennifer. That is a good point. I do think that I think Kate's did wonders with this, and I get why this, because when I read it at first, I was like, why did this get an Eisner nod? And then when you read volume two, like it makes sense. Um why it got an Eisner nod. I don't think, to be honest with you, in all the comics and graphic novels that I've read in my lifetime, I don't think I've quite read something like this. Now, I've read Kate's before, but I don't think that I have read anything like this. This is different. Kate's wrote one of my favorite, um, he wrote one of my favorite comic issues. Was it Kate's who wrote it? Maybe it wasn't Kate's. I'm double checking right now because I don't want to give y'all misinformation. But I have read Kate's before. Um, and this is this was different than what I was used to from him, I think. But it does make me want to go back and read some of his stuff that he, like some of his other work that he was referencing. Because some of this stuff that he was referencing, I was like, I have not read that. Like I've never read God Country. Um, like that's different than what I've ever experienced. I read when he started doing Venom, that's what it was. I was like, what did I read by him? When he started doing Venom, Kate's is what got me into Venom. That got me really, really interested in Venom. And so this, like I said, this is very different than what I've ever um seen by him. But I think it was a job well done. Different and probably one of the most unique concepts that we have on the slate for this year, because we're not going to get anything that's this meta for the rest of the year. Like that's wild. I didn't do any more digging, but I'm wondering too about because there was a couple of sections where I thought it was the scene with Kirkman and the one with Kate's about the power of comics for the writers themselves. And I thought both of their storylines were very interesting. So like Kate's talking about, and I don't know if this is his true experience, but everything just felt so like personal to their lives that I maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know if Kate's had dealt with substance abuse. Um, and that's how he ended up doing God Country. But I think that it also plays this into this idea that comics save lives, whether that's like in a very personal way, in terms of like, I feel in Kate's experience, like I did something worth living for, or like in Kirkman's experience where he's talking about, like this is something that he was very passionate about, but at the end of the day, it took The Walking Dead for him to get that big break. And once he got that big break with The Walking Dead, anything that he attached his name to, um, is now it's a huge thing. But he didn't have that before, and he was struggling on the cusp of, financial ruin, on the cusp of moving back in with his parents, and it finally happened for him. Even the same thing with like Zdarsky talking about like, when he was talking about how he had um applied for so many jobs, like I tried construction, I tried doing, the restaurant gig. And it's like I'm not good at that stuff. Like the one thing that I am good at is comics, and I think it speaks to how difficult it is to break into this industry. You can be talented, but at the end of the day, you know, you never know whether you're going to get your big break or not. And so you kind of are slumming it out until you get to that point, which is it's difficult on writers as well. And even though I laughed and say, it's cathartic with the whole Kirkman situation, I really do like, him speaking about the fact that it was difficult to do The Walking Dead and how dark it was for him. I think sometimes we take for granted like some of these writers who do like darker series, how much that can pull out of you as a person to take your mind, your body, your spirit into that dark space and to be able to produce this work. And that can be draining on them, and trying to find that balance of, okay, I'm doing this really, really dark thing, but what can I do to kind of like lighten it up? And for Kate's, I feel like this was him like having fun. It was a lot of commentary about the hard work and effort that writers and artists put into comics. It talks a lot about the comic book community and its readers, and the impact that they have. But I also think like he got to be completely absurd and ridiculous with this. And I think that's cool. I think that's really, really cool. It's different. Um, and I think it's like different from the typical like Marvel and DC shit that you see, which is not bad. Like I read Marvel and DC, but it's still so unfortunate that when people hear comic books or they hear graphic novels, a lot of people, their minds still instantly gravitate towards DC and Marvel. And DC and Marvel are these beasts of their own. They're like in a wheelhouse of their own. And so I think it turns a lot of people off, um, which is so unfortunate because there's this whole world, which is why I appreciated that Cates did all of these cameos. Once again, going back to what I said in the beginning, he does all of these cameos, but these cameos are writer-owned characters. Like this is people have put their passion into these worlds and these characters, and it belongs to them. And people miss out so much sometimes on these comics that are not Marvel and DC, or they're just so overwhelmed by the concept of Marvel and DC that they don't recognize that you don't have to do Marvel and DC. And not that this, like I said, not that there's anything wrong with it. And he gives his nods to it, especially the ones that have done such great work for Marvel and DC. But at the same time, it's like there's so much out there, and there's a little bit of um, stuff for everyone. I don't know. I thought that was, it's a unique concept. I will say that. Yes, and you could tell, like, and I love that Cates was able to like poke fun at himself. Like, he's like, I'm sure that some of the feedback that he's gotten, um, some of the, commentary on his personality, like, I'm not the center of the universe. Like, I think I control everything, and really I don't. And I'm pretentious. And he was able to make fun of himself. They all were, which is, you know, that's always great when someone can, take a look at themselves and joke around and laugh. Yes, yeah. It's a lot of love for the industry. Um, for an industry that gets a lot of flack from people who are not immersed in it, to be honest with you, who minimalize it to like it's not serious. You know, it's like kids, or it's only for like white men over 40 living in their mom's basement. It does in some circles. Comic books still don't get a good reputation, which is mind blowing to me because of some of the amazing things that we've even read in this book club that, you know, that is still a thing. That like people still think that way. You know, people still think it's not real reading. You can't learn anything from a comic book. What what substance can you get from a comic book? The fact that that's even still a thought or concept in 2024 is mind-boggling, but it still is. Mhm. It's it's not um I'm like you, Scarlett, too. I can't, I won't ever give up on Marvel and DC. Um, I do think that in some ways it is a lot, because they have to keep figuring out ways to reinvent their staple characters, while also adding new characters to the scene and making them kind of work with what they already have. But there is some badass storytelling in Marvel and DC. Um, it's just hard sometimes to figure out where to start or where to go, and it's a continuing journey. It's not one that I think you ever completely perfect unless you eat like unless it's your job. If it's not your job, I think it is a little bit difficult. But like one of my favorite single issues of all time is a Thor God of Thunder issue, where we first get introduced to um, the symbiote that plays a whole role in the Spider-Man universe with Venom and stuff like that. And that play between like evolution and creationism, like it's and it's like 30 something um it's like 30 something pages and so beautifully done. Um, yeah, yeah, I do. Um, don't be. I know it's easier said than done. It just don't be intimidated by it. Um, one of the things I know that people often say that does make sense sometimes. We just pick a character, um, and just go with it. Pick a character and a writer and go with that run. And eventually you'll be able to kind of pick up what you want and what you like. But what's so interesting, Jessica, about that is a lot of the indie authors that you are reading write for Marvel and DC. Like it's a big community, but not so big of a community at the same time. So the writing in the artwork that you see that is good are the same people who get contracted to write for Marvel and DC. I think that the major part of it is just not knowing where to start. Like Cates writes for Marvel, Zdarsky writes for Marvel. You know, like it's you know, I'm just saying, I don't mean any harm by that, but I'm like indie is great. I love indie as well. Some of the people who are doing indie are the same individuals who are writing for Marvel and DC. I just don't like to discount Marvel and DC and throw them completely out the window, but I can respect why people are hesitant to read them. But there is some great content that comes out of DC and Marvel as well. It's and it's not like it you can I mean, you can pick a year and start there or whatever the case may be. Um, but it's always nice. And we have a couple, I think we have maybe one or two, or maybe it's just one this year that we're reading. we're reading Chip Zdarsky this year, and I think the Chip Zdarsky that we are reading, um, if I'm not mistaken, is the Spider-Man. I think it's Spider-Man. Um, I'm double checking now, just because I don't want to give you the wrong information. Yeah, the one that we are reading from Marvel is Spider-Man: A Life Story by Chip Zdarsky. So yeah, yep, Spider-Man: A Life Story, which I think is going to be interesting, because um, it if it's the same as if it's the same, and Scarlett, maybe you can tell me if it's the same as the Fantastic Four life story, then it should take us through the different decades of Spider-Man, which I think is pretty interesting. And like, to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it's own, it's the MCU is its own thing. Like, the MCU is it's not always to the original content, which is what's so fascinating about it, is that they do what they want with the MCU, and it's not necessarily connected to the main universes that we typically see. So I agree with you here too, Liz. Like, sometimes it's, you know, um the comics sometimes get information out in a way that I think the movies can't always capture. Um, and so yeah, I have stopped keeping up with the MCU overall. I may pick it back up sometime, but for right now, I think I'm just trying to figure out how I want to tackle Marvel and DC this year. I really wanted to do the X-Men thing this year. We'll see if that happens. Okay, cool. Yeah, the Fantastic Four one is the same way, where each issue was a different decade, and we get to see the Fantastic Four kind of evolve around different events that were happening in that decade. Which, Scarlett, I'd be interested in your thoughts, like, if you were to read that one. But yeah, sorry, deviated, got way off track. I said all of that to say that, like, um, I think the comic book industry is a very versatile industry, and they have a little bit of something for everyone. They really do. And I think that he really paid homage to the industry with these two volumes. Volume one, in my opinion, is still a little shaky. Um, but I think that he got it. For me, he got it. He got it good in volume two. I think he did an excellent job in volume two. Um, because I was like, where is this going? Does this story have any purpose? Like, what? And really, honestly, if you think about it, like, there's plot holes all through the shit. Like, if you really think about it in the grand scheme of things, and he acknowledges that really, honestly, the story itself makes no sense to me. Differently, personally, I think that the story itself makes no sense. It was a means to an end. So, like, think about it. Like, with the little girl, like, we know nothing. Like, nothing ever really, we never come full circle to the little girl. And I think that that also is kind of a recognition that, you know, you don't always get it right. At every work that a writer puts out, um, like, it's not going to be the best thing. Whether they've been in the game for a long time, whether they're first starting out, they're human. And so the crossover, the actual storyline of it it's there's plot holes and chunks of the story missing. And he acknowledges that in volume two, where it's like, this story is not it did not go the way that I planned it to go. Like, this was not my intention with these characters. These characters were supposed to do X, Y, and Z, and it's not happening. And it's almost too that I think when authors or writers in general talk about their characters start to begin to control the story, and it's not always them. They don't always genuinely feel like it's them controlling. The characters take on a persona of their own, and I think that that's a very unique experience that I don't fully understand, um, because I am not a writer. But for some reason, seeing Kate's kind of put it out on the page like this, it made sense to me, where you can have, as a writer, you can have intentions for your characters, but eventually your characters will go to create a story of their own. And it's not always in your hands as a writer to determine this character. I've seen writers say, like, I wanted to pull my, um, I wanted to pull the character in this direction, but it felt like I was forcing them and they wanted to go in this direction. And I promise y'all, I don't think I ever got that idea until, like, reading this, and I'm like, this story was supposed to go in a completely different direction with this little girl, right? We never figure out what the hell happens to her, whether she finds her family. Ellie never finds her parents. Like, we don't know technically, like, if any of this shit is ever going to get solved. But I feel like that all of that was so significant, but also showed the human side of all of this. Like, because when I finished it and I thought back on it, I was like, I said, that story made no sense, actually. There's plot holes, nothing really adds up. 1 plus 1 is not really equaling 2, but that's not the greater purpose of it. Like, there's bigger intentions than what happened to little girl at the beginning. Exactly. Yeah. By the time you get to the end, um, of volume 2, I forgot, like, she meant nothing to me. At the end, I was like, "Okay, like, oh, here's a little girl, she pops up, and we go on this adventure, and nothing never comes of, like, her experience." But that was the human side of it. Like, I felt like it was intentional. Like, all of that was intentional. Like, Cates knew that this story had plot holes, and he goes out and tells you, "I know it has plot holes," but it's the beauty, I think, of the process of writing. And I think he paid a lot of honor and respect to his fellow writers by doing this the way that he did that. The plot holes, this is not, getting frustrated because he's controlling the narrative, right? He's supposed to be controlling the narrative, and then his characters are not allowing him to control the narrative anymore. And they have a mind, in essence, of their own. They have these feelings and personalities that the writer no longer can control. And I think that, that was him acknowledging how complicated it can be to be a comic book writer. There's a lot of respect that's not given to um there's not a lot of respect that's given to comic book writers, I think, because I think people don't think that their task is as difficult as, someone who's writing a prose book. Like, they don't that they're not seen as equivalent, but they really are. I really do feel like they are. When I met Stephen Graham Jones, did I meet him last year or the year before last? Dang, I think I met Stephen Graham Jones almost 2 years ago now. And when I was talking to him about doing the comic that he is doing right now, he was saying, like, how far in advance, like, he has to write, and how difficult that is, and how much time it takes to come up, he's like, with a 30-page book. There's a lot, there's so much that goes into it, and so you can't help but to respect. Um, you can't help but to respect that. It was fun. It was fun. It was the chaos. It was I'm telling you, the unhinged attitude of all the writers and illustrators that were in on this comic was what, for me, made it so enjoyable. I did Allison, no lie, me too. I forgot that he died. I really forgot. It took me a second, like, oh yeah, he did die. Like, just uh I love when Ellie took off her makeup and wig in the bathroom. Am I the only one that didn't know? Um, I'm not gonna say that I knew 100%. I'm not gonna say that because I thought maybe she could have been because she kept wearing that superhero mask, but I thought maybe she was just like a super fan who liked the cosplay. Um, but the moment that she went into the bathroom, I was like, okay, she must be. But hindsight is everything because with the little girl, then it made sense with the makeup, and she knew to put the makeup on her and stuff like that. Um, it's yeah, it was an interesting. You are capturing a lot of my feelings tonight. I wasn't, yeah, it's like I didn't really know, but I also, it wasn't a shocker that she was a comic book character. It was. It was. And the fact that I feel like the way that they designed the comic book characters is an ode to old school comics. That very like pixelated look to them. It felt very like 1950s, 1960s comic book art. And I really did appreciate that because in my head I'm thinking like, how are they going to differentiate between the comic book characters and the humans? And the pixelated art is what, yeah. Yeah, yeah, it's hindsight is everything. Cause like, you it when I was like, "Huh, okay. Yeah, so that's how she knew what to do with, like, the makeup," because, in that moment, it didn't really stand out to me that she knew to use like, the makeup would work. Like, it just never I never for a moment paused and was like, "Oh, yeah, she knows what to do with the makeup probably because she she's done this before." It just never I never questioned it at all. It was only until she took off her makeup and wig that I was like, "That's how that bitch knew." Hey, Kathleen. Yeah, the old school art was like it was a nice touch. There were so many nods to so many different components of this community that I think comic book people or even people who just are, beginning their journey in comics and graphic novels or are interested in doing more with comics and graphic novels. It was good, man. It was good. I wish that that first volume was a little bit stronger, but I must say, second volume kicked ass. He did his thing. And it made me want to go back and read so much stuff. I was like, dang, I need to continue with Wicked and Divine. I need to continue with Chew. I really, really want to go back and read Sex Criminals because it's been so long since I've read Sex Criminals. I want to go back and read some of Kate's older works. I want to go back and check out some of Kirkman's other stuff. Like, there were so many. Um, there were so, it just, I think that's another, honestly, I'm interrupting myself, but I think that's another part about this whole experience that I could appreciate is that not only were you in this comic, this meta ass comic, but it gave you the urge to want to check out some of this other stuff, to like discover some of this other stuff. Which, I say like, oh, I still do think that that was a weaker part is that not having that back knowledge. But I think in the same regard too, now that I'm sitting with it a little bit longer, that it really does encourage people to maybe want to try some of this other stuff out. Which you could, because in that first volume, he does list out all of the people who like consented to him playing with their characters, um, and listing the creators and what comics they came from. I think was brilliant. Because the first thing that I did is went and checked out Invincible on KU, because I was like, I'm gonna give Kirkman another run. Like I because like, oh gosh, The Walking Dead is just it's so, I have so many complicated feelings about The Walking Dead, in terms of how he crafts certain characters, especially his you know his handling of black women was not always my favorite either in the comic. I haven't watched a TV show, so I don't know if it's any different. But just that whole Kirkman dialoguing section. I'm not gonna lie, I went and I put Invincible on my Kindle, so it does. Um, it does. Yeah, it was good advertisement. Hmm. Yeah, that pixelated thing. I was like, wow. Even the coloring of the characters was just very, not just like the actual, like the the penciling and the actual like drawing of the characters, but even the inking part of it and the coloring was very intentional. It was a lot of I feel like there was a lot of moving pieces and parts of this, where paying attention to detail was almost everything. I think um, if I was to go back and reread this, I feel like I would get something else out of it, which to me is always a sign of any good, like, manga, comic, graphic novel, memoir, like whatever, is that you can go back, and not just from the words, but the art. You will get so much more going back and rereading it, like checking out things that you may have missed in the background, noticing the small details like the Batman symbol and it being Scott Snyder, like being able to connect those dots. I think you get to appreciate it. Yeah, and it was, listen, and it's in black and white, and it was funny when Ellie was like, I think it was Ellie who said it, like, "Why would you wanna go back?" Or maybe it was someone else. One of them said to to him, "Why would you wanna go back? You're in black and white." Like, it's true, like, I'm not gonna lie, like, I was like, "The shade, it's the shade." Like, "You're not even in color, like, why would you wanna go back?" So that's what I that moment for me really made me chuckle, because they're actually going back. I don't know if they stopped, but, a coworker and I were talking about they were re-releasing, issues of The Walking Dead in color, but the entire series is done in black and white, which makes it very, very interesting. Like, it makes so that line hit hard for me because um you don't see that all the time. I mean, of course, you see it in manga, um, but I can't give you a ton of comics that are primarily in black and white, but The Walking Dead is entirely in black and white, which is a very interesting choice. But yes. Mhm. It makes me think about when I had went back and was reading some of the Marvel comics from the 60s, where, we get introduced to some of the, interesting characters in the Marvel universe. Like, I think I read for like the Hulk's first appearance, Spider-Man's first appearance, and the artwork is very I always say like the palette that they use for coloring was very limited. It was it was very, very, very limited. Yeah, and that's it. It was good for printing in newspapers back then, but reading it now, even the writing, like the writing is the writing is tough to get through. It's very different. I will say that if y'all ever get the opportunity, um, and I don't say like read a lot, but if you ever get the opportunity to go back and read some of those older comics, you will appreciate some of the stuff that we see today. Because let me tell y'all, reading Stan Lee, I don't want to upset the comic gods, but Stan Lee is a tough cookie, man. His writing is very, it it's a lot. It is a lot. It is a lot. But all right, y'all. We are almost at an hour, and I don't want to keep rambling on and keep y'all here for forever. But we are scheduled to do our next live show. I had to pull up a calendar on February 28th. That is the last Wednesday of the month. I probably will do 9 again. Just 9 o'clock is just good timing for me. I know I usually typically do 8 or 8:30, but 9 o'clock just um it's better timing for me right now. So I probably will schedule it again for 9 o'clock. And we are going to be reading two different ones for February. It's Hotel Dare by Terry Blass, either way, and then Eve by Victor Laval. Both of those, I believe, were done by Kaboom, if I'm not mistaken. So we're jumping into a different publisher, which I do like that. Um, we have some very in this first 3 months we're looking at different publishers. January is Image, February is Kaboom, in March is Marvel. So we get a little bit of a variation. So don't forget Hotel Dare by Terry Bloss, Eve by Victor Laval, and it will be February 28th. And we're just going to go ahead and say at 9 p.m. EST. If I have to change the date or the time, I will let y'all know. But I look forward to chatting about those two with y'all. And I will see y'all then. Have a good night.